All right, welcome to kind of the first chapter that we're going to start reading. And there's not really chapters in this book. It's more like every paragraph is numbered throughout the book, and there are section headings. So that it's one continual section. If you look, for example, on the screen at the book, table of contents, it's just the industrial society and its future. Not terribly long, but it's broken into section headings. So we're going to cover leftism and over-socialization as the two major headings. Now, before we get into it, I want to say a few things. One, I'm going to remind you early on why we're reading this book in relation to Luigi Mangione and how it relates. We're going to look a little bit at that Goodreads account that Luigi Mangione wrote, where he gave in a review of this book. And we're going to look at Luigi's Goodreads account so we can focus on what things specifically Luigi commented about this book, because this book has got a lot of controversial topics. And so that's the other thing we're going to talk about. We're going to start kind of in reverse. I'm going to talk about the controversial topics so far that we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to go and look at that Goodreads account, and then we're going to get into the meat of things. Now, controversial topics. Let's talk about that before we get to that Goodreads account. So right off the bat, the first two sections are called leftism and over-socialization. And so I do this with some trepidation. I'm not a deeply political person. The religious right versus the liberal left kind of argument in America, Republicans versus Democrats, these are things that I try to avoid. I view politics as a divisive tactic. It's a bit, to me, manipulative in the sense that I feel like at the end of the day, everything serves big business. That's my view. And so the idea that there's a right and a left, Republicans and Democrats, at the end of the day, they all serve the same corporations. And so no matter what you get arguing about, whether it's abortion, whether it's right or wrong, or religion, whether it's right or wrong, or whether we should have prayers in school, whether it's right or wrong, or whether we should, have socialized medicine, right or wrong, all those questions at the end of the day don't really matter. They're basically manipulation tactics to keep the population divided amongst each other, fighting with each other, while at the end of the day, both sides are making money off of the same corporations. Now, that's my cynical view, and that's the part that I get political about. Now, the part that makes me nervous about this discussion of this book is it's getting into ideologies, political ideologies, right? And so it's a manifesto of Ted Kaczynski. It's his political ideologies. And people who don't think critically, for example, can see anytime somebody mentions black people, for example, that they're racist. If you mention black people and go on a tirade about black people and how they're different than white people, then that makes you a racist. Now, again, people who are not critical thinkers can't seem to listen to what's being said, even when the person says, I'm not saying that I'm racist. I'm not saying that I believe this or that. I'm trying to explain to you a concept. That's what's happening in this chapter as well. The author is trying to explain concepts, and he even takes steps at times. Ted Kaczynski makes steps to tell you. He's not saying this thing or that thing is true. He's saying this is how society is operating. So again, one who has no real good socialization. No, anyways. One who doesn't have good listening skills. We'll get into that. You'll see maybe why I was kind of starting that sentence the way I did. One who doesn't have good listening skills will just hear certain words and immediately start reacting. This is something Ted Kaczynski is really kind of actually going to talk about, is the attitude and the way that we just react to things without really listening. We've been programmed in our society to react certain ways. I would say that that's some of Ted Kaczynski's message. And so where I'm going with the last thought on this is I'm going to be getting into leftism as Ted Kaczynski sees it. In particular, what he's pointing out, and I'm going to summarize something that Ted Kaczynski says without highlighting. So I had to pick what things I want to highlight. And so again, even what I highlight is telling you something about me, right? Which makes me nervous because again, we're talking about something that could be perceived as racist. We're seeing something that could be perceived as political, and what parts I choose to highlight and talk about couldn't say things about me. Now, let me explain something briefly about myself. I play devil's advocates with everything, almost everything. And so if I find myself living in a very, very conservative area, I become more liberal because I'm basically fighting against the groupthink. Everyone around me thinks a certain way, and I get frustrated at people not thinking and just repeating everything that everybody says around them because it feels good. Society is their little pocket of society, which might be very conservative in my area, for example. All they do is repeat the same shit over and over. I see that as closed-mindedness, and so I become more liberal because I try to fight back and make people think. Look, it's not, you guys are just repeating the same shit. Like, you're not thinking. Likewise, if I find myself in a very liberal society, like when I was living in Seattle and it's a more liberal city, and wokeism is this huge thing over there, I find myself becoming more conservative because exact same reason. Everyone around me seems to think the same way and say the same shit, and I see them not thinking. They're just repeating the same shit and values of everyone around them because that's that pocket of society. And so I'll become more conservative and rally against all the wokeism because I'm like, you're not fucking thinking for yourself. So this is my personality. I automatically gravitate towards rebelling against groupthink. And I think in a lot of ways, Luigi Mangione is the same way. Luigi Mangione left hints that he reviewed, or that he viewed certain people as NPCs. They're not really thinking. They're just going through life doing everything that they're told. This is something I feel like I picked up and resonated with Luigi Mangione, that people for the large part are sheeple. They are just NPCs, not thinking for themselves. And so when you talk about that, I can relate to that, and that's my whole thing in life. I hate seeing in people closed-mindedness where they stop thinking for themselves. And when a telltale sign of that is repeating the same thing that you hear everybody say in your area. Like, they just have stopped thinking. So with that huge thing, let me say this. I currently have very few friends that I hang out with or talk to on a regular basis. My closest, if you will, my closest people that with me are more liberal, not by choice on my part. It just happens to be that the people closest to me who are in my ear talking every day are more liberal, and they promote very liberal things and say the liberal thing that I hear all liberals saying. And so in that regards, I start to play devil's advocates. If I keep hearing the same shit over time that every liberal says from my liberal friends, then I'm like, I feel like I have to counter that, because I'm just like, you're not thinking for yourself. You're just repeating the same shit you hear from every liberal. Now, again, that doesn't mean I'm a conservative. I'm not a MAGA wearing Trump supporter. Neither am I a freaking, Democrat who votes a Democrat. In fact, every single election, just to get this out of the way, I vote for a different person depending on my mood. It's sometimes a Republican, it's sometimes a Democrat. I have things that I agree with on both sides. So as an appeal, and this, I feel like Ted Kaczynski's book is exactly the whole reason I'm having to make this massive appeal, is because of what Ted Kaczynski is going to point out. We've become afraid of everything. We've been afraid to tell people our opinions because somebody's going to label us something and put us in a box, because it's the easy thing to do. And so we have to spend all this time explaining ourselves because our society has become broken. And that's what this is talking about a lot. So one last thing I'm going to say about Ted Kaczynski, leading into this section about leftism and over socialization, is that because society, industrial society, has moved in a certain way, we have all become cogs in a wheel. We are all basically just functioning to support the system. That's the general message, I think, at the beginning of the book. And I'm not going to highlight a lot of that, but his argument is that industrialization has led us as a society to become groupthink. It's imperative for the socialized money-making system for us to become group thinkers and not buck the system. Just go make money, earn money for your slave makers, your masters. Go make money and be good little workers and good socialized people and do what you're told. That is what society, industrial society, and its future. That's the name of this book. That's what it's moving us towards: is be good little soldiers, do exactly what you're told, don't think, don't rebel, sleep, eat, obey, like They Live. Oh my God, if you haven't seen the science fiction movie They Live, you must see it. Eat, sleep, obey. Oh my God, anyways, great movie. If you haven't seen it, it's an old movie now, but it's fucking worth it. Kind of goes along with this book. All right, let's take a look at Luigi Mangione's Goodreads, because I want to point out what we should be focusing on. Because here's the other difficulty of this chapter, and I left us some extra time to talk about all these issues here. The issues, for example, of leftism and over-socialization that we get at the very beginning, one can argue, is that how Luigi Mangione thinks? Remember, this Goodreads account tells us that Luigi Mangione found this book useful. So the part we don't necessarily have is, what parts did Luigi Mangione most resonate with? Now, we do have it a little bit, and I'm going to show you down here. If you scroll down here, here are quotes that Luigi liked. So these quotes from the book, which aren't very many right here, have some quotes that Luigi signaled or sectioned off, right, and commented on. So that tells us a little bit about what parts of the book Luigi Mangione specifically focused on. Also, his summary of the book tells us a little bit about what Luigi focused on. What I will say is Luigi didn't focus so much on, we're going to look at some of those highlights real quick before we get into this first chapter. He didn't highlight the leftism or over socialization that we're going to hear now, so keep that in mind. However, he did, again, focus on the idea of us becoming NPCs, not thinking for ourselves, groupthink, and things like this. And so that does resonate with Luigi Mangione. So as we get into the two sections today, leftism and over socialization, you will see things that mirror things that Luigi Mangione said. So I would say that this is a good book for us to read to understand the psyche of Luigi Mangione. If he took time to digest this book, these are things that are in the back of Luigi's mind. We don't know what all things he agreed with. I'm certain, as is anybody, there are parts of the book that he doesn't agree with and parts that he does. But as we read through the chapter today, as we read through this, keep in mind how Luigi Mangione might be thinking. If he liked this book, was he in agreement to all these things or some of these things? All right, let's look at some quotes real quick. It's easy to quickly and thoughtlessly write off this manifesto as that of a lunatic in order to avoid facing some of the uncomfortable problems it identifies. But it's simply impossible to ignore how prescient many of the predictions about modern society turned out. So again, Ted Kaczynski wrote this quite a while ago. I would argue that Ted Kaczynski wrote this before we had the term wokeism, right? So now we have this big wokeism movement that most people know what wokeism means. And that was written before, I think, wokeism was written, or this book was written before wokeism was kind of a coined term. And so as Luigi is saying, what we're seeing in society today, i.e., I'm going to add for him, what we're seeing in wokeism movement, for example, is something that Ted Kaczynski was predicting. It's the direction society is moving. Another quote from Luigi about this book: he was a violent individual, rightfully imprisoned, who maimed innocent people. While these actions tend to be characterized as those of a crazy Luddite, however, they are more accurately seen as those of an extreme political revolutionary. So Luigi Mangione has taken exception, according to what we've seen in the alleged diary of Luigi Mangione, that Ted Kaczynski hurt and maimed innocent people, and that therefore he's rightfully imprisoned. So if Luigi Mangione did commit an act of violence, does he consider himself rightfully imprisoned if he did something? The difference is that according to him, Ted Kaczynski maimed innocent people. That's the key right there, maimed innocent people. Luigi Mangione does not believe, I believe, according to the argument of the writings, does not believe that who he assassinated was an innocent person. So there's where he would draw the line between what Ted Kaczynski did and what himself did, if he did it. Keep in mind, I'm not trying to say that Luigi Mangione did it. My gut tells me he's involved in it and he did it, but we have to presume innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. And let's have the bigger conversation. Another quote here: he had the balls to recognize that peaceful protests have gotten us absolutely nowhere. At the end of the day, he's probably right. Oil barons haven't listened to environmentalists, but they feared them. So this is another interesting idea behind Luigi Mangione's mindset, right? Listen to this and hear me later, as Hans and Franz said from Saturday Night Live way back in the day when that was a thing. Recognizing that peaceful protests have gotten nowhere. They haven't listened to environmentalists, but they feared them. This is important for understanding Luigi Mangione's mindset, I believe. If Luigi Mangione is making some kind of self-defense attack against the healthcare system that is abusing people and hurting people and doing damage, then protests against such, like the 2 protests that happened to United Healthcare right before the shooting. Protests do nothing to change the policies. There were people protesting outside the headquarters of United Healthcare before Brian Thompson was shot. Those protests did nothing to stop what United Healthcare was doing. Right out of the book, or Luigi Mangione's quotes, peaceful protests get us nowhere at the end of the day, and oil barons don't listen to environmentalists, but they fear them. So maybe they don't listen to protesters. Maybe Luigi Mangione could have been one of the protesters who protested outside. I said this in earlier videos. Is it possible Luigi Mangione was one of the protesters outside the United Healthcare? I've speculated about that. Luigi Mangione went dark at the same time the protests were happening outside of the headquarters of United Healthcare. Was he one of those people? Did he decide, like they did, that it gets us nowhere? And look at the timing of this review. This is posted January 23rd, 2024. So the shooting happened, I think, December 4th, 2024. So this is at the beginning of the year, the thought process leading up to it. Who knows if that was in the mind as well. Again, we're going a little long on the introduction before we get into it, but all of this is important groundwork in my opinion. So you either like this type of series or you don't. When all other forms of communication fail, violence is necessary to survive. This is enormous to understanding Luigi Mangione if he did do the things they accuse him of. When all other forms of communication fail, violence is necessary to survive. You may not like his methods about Ted Kaczynski, but to see things from his perspective, it's not terrorism, it's war and revolution. Again, if I were getting into the psyche, which is what I'm trying to do, of Luigi Mangione, I would say that Luigi Mangione is basically saying violence is sometimes necessary. So therefore, if Luigi Mangione did the things that he did, he has come to the conclusion that violence is necessary in this case. His methods, meaning Ted Kaczynski's, however, may not be one that you like. But at the end, I think even Luigi is saying, in the end, the question is, was it wrong? You may not like his methods, but was it wrong? Now, he did claim that he didn't appreciate Ted Kaczynski maiming innocent people and that he deserves to be in prison because of maiming innocent people. But the violent part, I don't think Luigi Mangione argues with. That's the thing. I don't think Luigi, from what I see in the psyche, Luigi doesn't have a problem with the violence. What he has a problem with is violence against innocents, which is why, if Luigi did what he did, he took steps to make sure innocent people didn't get hurt. And then he says it's not terrorism, it's war and revolution. Peaceful protest is outright ignored. Economic protest isn't possible in the current system. So how long until we recognize that violence against those who lead us to such destruction is justified as self-defense? No, I've said this from the beginning. No other sentence, perhaps, tells us more about the potential mindset of Luigi Mangione than this. Peaceful protests don't work. Economic protests don't work. Telling us, I'm going to add, to write to your senator or to your attorney general's office doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. We've been told it. We've been looking at examples of this when we read American Sickness by Elizabeth Rosenthal. Trying to pass laws and enact laws, and it has never worked. The system is out of control. The laws don't work. When you pass a law, they find a way to make it more profitable for them. So here's the key. How long until we recognize as a society that violence against those who lead us to destruction is justified as self-defense? I believe that if Luigi Mangione did what he did, he believes that his acts were an act of war, an act of self-defense, and were justified. Therefore, one can argue Luigi Mangione could have committed the crime they claim that he does and still believe that he's not guilty. Why is he not guilty? Because it was justifiable homicide. This is something I've said from the beginning. And again, before YouTube or somebody tries to shut my account down because I'm suggesting that it is justifiable homicide, this is a thought process. I'm trying to explain and understand how Luigi Mangione thinks. I'm not advocating for violence. I'm telling you this is what I see as a likely psyche evaluation of Luigi Mangione, that he viewed the healthcare system as out of control and that violence against a system that's causing harm to people, that's self-defense. If you commit violence against somebody who's harming everyone, it's an act of self-defense. These companies don't care about you, your kids, or your grandkids. They have zero qualms about burning down the planet for a buck. So why should we have any qualms about burning them down to survive? Again, direct concept of what Luigi Mangione is thinking. It is not wrong. It is, if in fact, justified, perhaps, in Luigi Mangione's mind, to shoot a healthcare exec, a CEO, because they are harming people. We're just animals, just like everything else on the planet, except we've forgotten the law of the jungle and bend over for our overlords when any other animal would recognize the threat and fight to the death for their survival. Violence never solved anything is a statement uttered by cowards and predators. Again, this entire Goodreads section should tell you everything you need to know about Luigi Mangione's mindset if he did what he did. He is clearly telling us cowards bend over and take it from their overlords. Cowards are the ones who sit there and just keep acting like things are going to get better by protesting. It's the people who stand up and defend other people who are doing the right thing, who are justified. And unlike Ted Kaczynski, don't do it in a way that harms innocent people. Go after the people who are committing war against you. That is, I believe, the mindset of Luigi Mangione if he did what he said. It's clear from his writings and the things that he that's all him, right? This writing is all him telling you acts of violence are justified against people who are leading us to destruction, and cowards are the ones that sit around saying violence never solved anything. That, whether you like it or not, that appears to be the motive of the mindset if he did it. Now, last thing before we get into, I spent way longer on this intro. Maybe I'll try to find a way to trim some out. Last thing, let's look at some of those quotes that Luigi actually focused on as some insight as we get into the book. The concept of mental health in our society is defined largely by the extent to which individuals behave in accord with the needs of the system, and does so without showing signs of stress. So that is important. This is going to be what we're going to get into right now. The first chapter is that they consider it, there's something wrong with you. You've got mental illness if you aren't going along with groupthink. That's the new way of explaining things. Everyone should be groupthink. Everybody should just be doing their little job in the cogs in the wheel to make the system go round and round, to make money for big business. And if you don't, there's a mental illness on your part. If you buck the system, you have mental illness. I have maintained again, Luigi Mangione has no mental illness. What he's thinking, in my opinion, is 100% rational. And I see it as rational in some regards as well. Again, now, not advocating violence. What I'm saying is I don't see what his actions are as irrational. I may have chosen a different path. You may have chosen a different path. But what he's thinking and the process he went through is not irrational. To label it as such and to say that he has mental illness is to, again, succumb to groupthink. Because that's exactly what they want to tell you. Anytime you think differently than go make money for your corporate overlords, you have mental illness. That's exactly what we're fighting against, what he's fighting against, what Ted Kaczynski's fighting against, is shaming everyone into thinking you have mental illness if you don't think that there's something good about your overlords making you make them money, and just think as the group thinks, and stop being individualized. And if you rebel against that, you've got mental illness and we should go lock you up. All right, we don't need to go into anything more. Let's go into the book itself. These other quotes, that other quote's not super important for this, and I've taken way longer than I wanted to get into the book. So let's get into now this Goodreads account. And again, super political. I don't want to make this political. I'm just going to show you what I caught from the leftism and over socialization part that I thought were pertinent, and how it might relate to Luigi Mangione. These are not my thoughts, but obviously if I selected those to talk about, then there's a reason for it. So just try not to kick me in the balls. And again, I've been over socialized, so I have to apologize to you about what I'm going to say. All right. We therefore advocate. See, this is a chapter. There are all these paragraphs they're points that are basically numbered. So there's 3, there's 4, which actually is 2 paragraphs. There's 5. That's the way the whole book seems to be, is just numbered paragraphs. All right. We therefore advocate, and I don't know who he means by we advocate this. There's a lot of this royal we thing. We do this and we say this and we say that. As far as we know, Ted Kaczynski wrote this book all by himself. So who is the we? I think he's meaning we as in people who think like me. Now, I don't think he means anybody very specifically. I don't know that he was working with any group of individuals, but Ted Kaczynski did probably, I think, view himself as not being alone in his thoughts. And so he was saying we, those who think like us, like me, those who think like this. And so he just keeps saying we think this, we think that, we think that we should do this. We therefore advocate a revolution against the industrial system. The revolution may or may not make use of violence. It may be sudden. It may be a relatively gradual process spanning a few decades. We can't predict any of that. So again, Ted Kaczynski didn't believe necessarily that to fight back against the industrial system, it needs violence. However, it may or may not make use of violence. And it may be said, but he believes we should fight against this industrial system that makes us cogs in the wheel to make money for our overlords. All right, this is not to be a political revolution, not to be a political revolution. Its objective will be to overthrow not governments, but the economic and technological basis of the present society. So why is this important? Again, when anyone starts turning this into, you must be an effing Republican, listen to the way you're talking, you must be one of those Trump supporters, you must be a MAGA hat wearer, and you try to then pigeonhole this conversation into that makes you a Republican because you're against leftists, you're against liberals. That means you're a conservative. Therefore, that means you wear MAGA hats. That means you support Trump. That means you believe in all the things that Trump believes in. Because again, you're not thinking anymore. You're just group thinking everything, just repeating the same shit. So Ted Kaczynski feels the need to tell you, this is not political. Don't make this Republicans versus Democrats. The objective is not to overthrow a government or a political party, I would add, but the economic and technological basis. This is the money makers. This is what he's railing against. The money makers has designed society to make us workers for money, to make us workers for the system. The system has nothing to do with it. It's just a mechanism to get us to fight amongst ourselves and then focus on making our overlords money. That's a lot of me interpreting Ted Kaczynski's work. For practical reasons, we have to confine our discussion to areas that have received insufficient public attention or in which we have something new to say. So what he's saying is a lot of stuff in this book he's not saying, and he's trying to focus on things that aren't said enough. That's what he's basically saying. The psychology of the modern leftism. So here we go. And again, don't freaking make this about conservatives versus liberals and all that shit. Try to listen to the what's behind this. Almost everyone will agree that we live in a deeply troubled society. One of the most widespread manifestations of the craziness of our world is leftism. So a discussion of the psychology of leftism can serve as an introduction to the discussion of the problems of modern society in general. Now, before you flip out and make this political, saying our problem is those damn liberals. If we didn't have damn liberals, we wouldn't have a problem, i.e. you should all be Christian, right-wing, Nazi waving, whatever. That's not what he's saying. Again, if you start going down that rabbit hole, you are doing the exact thing this book is against. You're group thinking shit. You're just repeating the same bullshit that your overlords want you to think. They don't want you thinking for yourself. So if you just went down that rabbit hole of seeing a Nazi salute because he says that we need to get away from leftism, then you're group thinking. Start thinking for yourself. When we speak of leftists in this article, we have in mind mainly socialists, collectivists, political correct types, feminists, gay and disability activists, animal rights activists, and the like. But not everyone who's associated with one of these movements is a leftist. Now stop, because again, your groupthink mentality, if you're a group thinker, is going to be this, you're going to pick up on a word. He just said the word gay. Fuck that guy. I like homosexuals. There's nothing wrong with your sexual orientation. He didn't say there was anything wrong with your sexual orientation. Stop group thinking. Ted Kaczynski's book is not telling you that there's something wrong with gays. He's saying leftism generally has to do with these particular groups, but he doesn't, several times he says it's not those groups are not the problem. It's the group think that's the problem. And so again, group think, that is when you start hearing words like feminist and gay and liberals and socialist, and immediately all you do is start reacting. You stop thinking, you start reacting. That's the shit that this whole book, and I think Luigi Mangione, is against. The NPC mentality. You don't think, you just react. They've trained you to trigger on certain words. Oh my God, he said gay, he said black, he said whatever. I'm going to trigger, and start immediately fighting me and shut down my brain and stop listening because you said a word that triggered me. And that's groupthink. And that's what this book is about so far. The two psychological tendencies that underlie modern leftism is we call feelings of inferiority and over socialization. Feelings of inferiority are characteristic of modern leftism as a whole, while over socialization is characteristic only of a certain segment of modern leftism. But this segment is highly influential. So that's what we're going to get into to finish this chapter today. We're going to talk about feelings of inferiority, how he believes that this happened, how people feel inferior, and then how we become over socialized. Those are the two things we're going to focus on before we end today's chapter. So, feelings of inferiority. When someone interprets as derogatory, almost anything that is said about him or about groups with whom he identifies, we conclude that he has an inferiority feelings or low self-esteem. This tendency is pronounced among the minority rights activists, whether or not they belong to the minority groups or rights that they defend. They are hypersensitive about words used to designate minorities and about anything that is said concerning minorities. The terms Negro, Oriental, handicap, or chick for an African, an Asian, or a disabled person, or a woman originally had no derogatory connotation. Broad and chick were merely the feminine equivalents of guy and dude or fellow. The negative connotations have been attached to these terms by activists themselves. Some animal rights activists have gone so far as to reject the word pet and insist on its replacement by animal companion. Leftist anthropologists go to great lengths to avoid saying anything about primitive people that conceivably be interpreted as negative. They want to replace the word primitive by non-literate. They seem almost paranoid about anything that might suggest that any primitive culture is inferior to our own. And then in parentheses, we do not mean to imply that primitive cultures are inferior to ours. We merely point out the hypersensitivity of leftist anthropologists. Now, again, if you are in the group think, as many people are, you already got triggered on every word he said. Negro, handicap, chick. You're already triggered, and that's exactly his point. Those words in themselves mean nothing. And our feelings of inferiority make us trigger off of words. That's exactly what I've been talking about. We become hypersensitive about the words used to designate minorities. And again, this is whether or not one is part of those groups. One of the things he points out is, for example, it's mostly white college kids, younger kids that are white college kids that are railing the most against African American rights. They're not black. They're not part of the African American community, but they're the most vocal. The whites are the most vocal about the indignities put upon black people. Instead of black people telling us how they feel about black people, white people have to tell you how you feel about black people. And that's what he's talking about, is that these people don't even, they're not even part of the groups that they're identifying with. And then they rail against the system and all the injustices of the system for things that aren't even affecting them personally. They take upon themselves these mantles because of an issue of inferiority, which we're going to explain a little bit more, and over socialization. So we're going to explain this a little bit more. Those who are most sensitive about politically incorrect terminology, political correctness is, again, this is written quite a while ago, but we are in a political correct society. Those who are most sensitive about politically incorrect terminology are not the average black ghetto dweller, Asian immigrant. Oh my gosh, see, again, you're going to trigger. You hear black ghetto dweller, and you're like, did he just call blacks ghetto dwellers? Stop the group think. Listen to what's being said. This is, and again, I find myself railing against it because every single time I see one of his trigger words, I can hear people saying, oh yeah, that guy's a racist. He talks about blacks being ghetto dwellers. No, you are not thinking if you're not listening to what he's saying, and you're triggering off of words. Stop triggering off of words. Those who are most sensitive about politically incorrect terminology are not the average black ghetto dweller, Asian immigrant, abused woman, or disabled person, but a minority of activists, many of whom do not even belong to any oppressed group, but come from privileged strata of society. Again, your white college educated people who are railing against blacks and Asians and all these other things, of which, and males who get indignant about, acts against women. Again, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with defending other people's rights. But what he's trying to say is these people aren't even in the groups that they're being most vocal, fighting about and making a huge stink about, and they don't even belong to those groups. And instead of allowing those groups to speak for themselves, they feel it's important for them to champion someone else's cause, which in the end is Ted Kaczynski's irony. You must think they're inferior because you feel that you need to come in and defend people for them. Right? That must mean, that's at the end of the day, that's the irony, I think, of what Ted Kaczynski is saying. You must, in your mind, actually view blacks as inferior if you as a white person have to keep coming to defend blacks like blacks can't defend themselves. So you are subconsciously believing that they're inferior while telling everybody they're not inferior, and telling us how much you believe they're not inferior by your actions, which show that you think you need to be their champion because they can't do it themselves. So, political correctness has its stronghold among university professors who have secure employment with comfortable salaries, and the majority of whom are heterosexual white males from middle upper class families. So I think Ted Kaczynski sees an irony in this. A lot of the political correct movement railing against the indignities of, the black man being put down are being promoted by white people with really good jobs who are really stable and are heterosexual, railing against your sexual rights, and there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect going on. The people who are championing the cause aren't the people who even are affected by it. Many leftists have an intense identification with the problems of groups that have an image of being weak, i.e. women, the defeated, American Indians, repellent, homosexuals. So again, you see, he just called homosexuals repellent. Listen and quit group thinking. I feel like I know where a lot of people are going as soon as they hear the word. That's why I keep stopping and saying, I don't know how you're reacting. Some of you are probably getting mad, like devil's advocates. I'm not having problems with these issues. Quit telling me. I know a good majority of people. And again, the people who are in my ear are people who are triggered by these words. All right. So the leftists themselves feel that these groups are inferior. This is exactly what I was saying. The leftists themselves feel that these groups are inferior. They would never admit to themselves that they have such feelings, but it is precisely because they do see these groups as inferior that they identify with their problems. And again, what does Ted Kaczynski say? We do not mean to suggest that women, Indians, etc. are inferior. We are only making a point about the leftist psychology. So again, if you out there are reading this and all you heard is Ted Kaczynski thinks that blacks are ghetto dwellers, you did not listen. He flat out told you, I'm not saying women, Indians, etc., all these things are inferior. What I'm saying is these people who rail against them, obviously, leftists obviously feel themselves, that those groups are inferior. That's why they feel the need to have to defend them for you, because they can't defend themselves. They're picked on society. And so these leftists feel like they must be inferior and they have to champion the cause. Feminists are desperately anxious to prove that women are as strong and as capable as men. Clearly, they are nagged by a fear that women may not be as strong and capable as men. And that's, again, the point. Feminists who raise so much saying that a woman can do everything a man can do must, at some psychological level, believe it's not true. That's why you have to constantly defend that they are, because you must believe that it's not true. And so you spend all your time telling people it is true. They are equal with men. But if you believe that, it would be self-evident. You wouldn't need to fight about it. You wouldn't have to tell us all the time. You wouldn't have to raise flags and march on shit about feminist rights. You wouldn't need to do that because it would become self-evident. But you obviously don't believe it is self-evident. You do think that they're inferior, which is why you feel you have to champion their cause. Leftists tend to hate anything that has an image of being strong, good, or successful. They hate America. They hate Western civilization. They hate white males. They hate rationality. The reasons that the leftists give for hating the West, etc., clearly do not correspond with their real motives. They say they hate the West because it's warlike, imperialistic, sexist, ethnocentric, and so forth. But where these same faults appear in socialized countries or in primitive cultures, the leftists find excuses for them. So again, all the things that they bitch about that our society does, if a smaller culture, a primitive culture does the same things, they make excuses for it. Not a big deal. But what they're ultimately railing against is power. If you have power, then somehow you're bad. Words like self-conscious, self-reliance, initiative, enterprise, optimism, etc., play little role in the liberal and leftist vocabulary. The leftist is anti-individualistic, pro-collectivist. He wants society to solve everyone's problems for them, satisfy everyone's needs for them, and take care of them. He is not the sort of person who has an inner sense of confidence in his own ability to solve his own problems and satisfy his own needs. The leftist is antagonistic to the concept of competition because deep inside he feels like a loser. And again, I'm trying to tell you what Ted Kaczynski is saying. I'm not trying to go on telling you how I feel about it per se. The idea is that what he's saying is leftists are anti-individualist and they're pro-collectivist. They go along with the groupthink. Think like the society. Do everything for society's benefit, not for your own. Don't be confident in yourself. Don't stand up for yourself. Just do what society wants you to do. The leftist hates science and rationality because they classify certain beliefs as true, i.e. successful, superior, and other beliefs as false, i.e. failed is inferior. The leftist's feelings of inferiority run so deep that he cannot tolerate any classification of some things as successful or superior and other things as failed or inferior. In other words, everything has to be equal. This is part, I would say, I'm going to go and say, I think this is the same kind of thing as the movement we had in schools, for example, where everybody got participation awards. There was no first place or last place. Everyone is equal. Everyone is a winner. Everybody is exactly the same. Groupthink, and they rail against anything that puts this person did better at something than that person, because that separates people. So we must be groupthink. We should shame anyone for being better than someone else, or talk about somebody being inferior to somebody else, because that in itself is a problem. We must all be equal, and there must be no differences amongst us. We must be the Borg. We must be assimilated. This also underlies the rejection by many leftists of the concept of mental illness and of the utility of IQ score or tests. Leftists are antagonistic to genetic explanations of human abilities or behaviors because such explanations tend to make some persons appear superior and inferior to others. Leftists prefer to give society the credit of blame for an individual's ability or lack of it. Thus, if a person is inferior, it is not his fault, but society's, because he has not been brought up properly. Now, this may be one of the most controversial things that he said. Even, it's the idea that your genetic upbringing may determine what your IQ score is going to be and how smart you can be. So this is perhaps one of the most racist things in a way that Ted Kaczynski can say. And look at that. Even I'm getting beat into by modern society is that his idea that genetics may play into your ability to achieve a certain IQ score or status in life may have something to do with it. He's saying, no, they have to come up with some other reason. It has to be society keeping you down. There can't be. And let me break this into a non-racist equivalent. One of the things that I have said over and over again, and I'm going on, this is so political, but I'm trying to make a point for this paragraph to make it a little less political, and I feel like I'm not going to do a great job, but let me try. I have long had a problem with the mentality of parents who keep telling their children, you can be anything when you grow up. This is not true. And yet we keep telling children over and over again, you can be anything when you grow up. Now, I jokingly say things like, that is not correct. Your white daughter will never be the first Black American president. So don't tell your white daughter that she can be anything she wants if she wants to be the first Black American president. Cannot happen. There are things that you cannot do. Telling your children that you can do anything and be anything you want to be is a lie. And you're not even thinking it through. And then let's go to genetics. If you are born with genetics that make you 5'4" at your highest, you will never be the center in the NBA, ever. And I don't care how much you love the NBA and you wish that you could be a basketball player someday, you will never be a center in the NBA. But the modern think wants to tell you, you can be anything you want. Somehow you can overcome your genetics. And that's where it gets into the dicey area. He's saying that genetics have to do with somewhat with what you're going to be able to do. And telling people that, no, if you're not a center in the NBA, it's not because you're 5'4", It's because society is keeping you down and telling you can't be a center in the NBA. So what we should do instead is we should make new laws, and the NBA should make it so that a 5'4" person is just as eligible to be the center in the basketball game as the person who's 6'10", and that we should take steps to make sure that a 5'4" center can go there to prove how open we are, how woke we are, that we've now realized that there's no difference between the 5'4" and the 6'2". There you go. His feelings of inferiority are so ingrained that he cannot conceive of himself as individually strong and valuable. Hence, the collectivism of the leftist. He can feel strong only as a member of a large organization or a mass movement with which he identifies himself. So again, you can't take pride in yourself. You can't say, gee, I got lucky. I won the genetic lottery. I'm 6'10", so that's why I get to play basketball as a center for the Knicks. You can't do that because you can't take pride in yourself. You can only think of the whole group. You cannot talk. And again, let's be clear. If you're born with genetics that makes you 6'10", you can't take pride in it. It's not something you had any control over. But the point being is that you can't accentuate things that make you uniquely positioned to do something. You must be groupthink. And the only time you can have any kind of pride in anything is if you are part of a group somewhere. So notice the masochistic tendency of leftist tactics. Leftists protest by laying down in front of vehicles. They intentionally provoke police or racists to abuse them. These tactics may not be effective, but many leftists use them not as a means to an end, but because they prefer masochistic tactics. Self-hatred is a leftist trait. So again, I'm just stating what Ted Kaczynski said. He indicates that leftists really actually want to be abused, and that's why they choose forms of protest like laying down in front of vehicles or allowing or engaging, rioting and fighting against cops where they get the shit kicked out of them by cops. That's because deep down inside they have self-hatred and want to get their ass kicked. That's what he's basically saying. I don't know if I can go with that, but that's what he's saying. If one believes that affirmative action is good for Black people, does it make sense to demand affirmative action in hostile or dogmatic terms? Obviously, it would be more productive to take a diplomatic and conciliatory approach that would make at least verbal and symbolic concessions to white people who think that affirmative action discriminates against them. But leftist activists do not take such an approach because it would not satisfy their emotional needs. Helping Black people is not their real goal. That's Ted Kaczynski. People who are big into the affirmative action aren't really trying to help Black people. That's his point. Helping Black people is not their real goal. Instead, race problems serve as an excuse for them to express their hostility and frustration and frustrated need for power. In doing so, they actually harm Black people because the activists' hostile attitude towards the white majority tends to intensify racial hatred or race hatred. So what he's saying is the irony is that the people who are making whites most pissed off about affirmative action are other whites fighting on behalf of Blacks. It's not the Blacks so much. It's not them who are creating the big stink. It's the whites telling other whites how they're mistreating Blacks that's making other whites pissed off about the mistreat. It's, again, let people fight their own fight is kind of what he's saying. But the fact that you feel you need to champion their cause suggests you think they're inferior. Psychologists use the term socially. Now, here's the last section. We're almost done. And I feel like we're going to probably be a little over an hour. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll get lucky. Over socialization. Psychologists use the term socialization to designate the process by which children are trained to think and act as society demands. That's a big one. Psychologists use the term socialization to designate the process by which children are trained to think and act as society demands. A person is said to be well socialized if he believes in and obeys the moral code of his society and fits in well as a functioning part of that society. This is the groupthink. Schools are taught to make us little group thinkers, to not rebel, to think like we're supposed to think and do the things we've told. And that is a conditioning. They're conditioning children to think all the same. That's the goal. The moral code of our society is so demanding that no one can think, feel, or act in a completely moral way. For example, we are not supposed to hate anyone, yet almost everyone hates someone at some point or another, whether he admits it to himself or not. But what they'll tell you, he's saying, is that you should be ashamed of it. So the reality is all of us feel moments of hatred towards other people. All of us do, but they shame you for feeling that way. But the dichotomy is you can't stop yourself from feeling that way. So they shame you for things that you can't control. You're going to hate certain people. You're not going to like certain things, but then you're told to be ashamed of that, and you can't control it. So then you feel this downward spiral about what's wrong with me that I can't control myself. I know I've been told I can't have these feelings, but I do. So then you feel ashamed and you hide them. You don't tell people that you hate other people, because to admit that would be wrong. You've been told it's wrong to hate other people. So then you suppress your own feelings. You're afraid to tell people that you have feelings, and you don't know how to deal with the fact that you have those feelings. So some people are so highly socialized that the attempt to think, feel, and act morally imposes a self-burden on them. In order to avoid feelings of guilt, they continually have to deceive themselves about their own motives and find moral explanations for feelings and actions that in reality have non-moral origin. One of the most important means by which our society socializes children is by making them feel ashamed of behavior or speech that is contrary to society's expectations. So a kid says something that sounds like it could be interpreted as racist or separative in any way that makes themselves better or whatever, and they immediately are scolded and scoffed, shut down, reprimanded for any kind of thing that makes them, stand out, individualized. They get told, you can't be individualized, you can't be better than anybody else, nobody can be inferior, these are inappropriate things, and they're scolded as children, and then that sets in as adulthood, and then the cycle continues. If this is overdone, or if a particular child is especially susceptible to such feelings, he ends up feeling ashamed of himself because he realizes this is not how I feel, but this is how I'm told that I have to perform. The majority of people engage in a significant amount of naughty behavior. They lie, they commit petty thefts, they break traffic laws, they goof off at work, and they hate someone. They say spiteful things, or they use underhanded tricks to get ahead of other guys or the other guy. The over-socialized person cannot do these things, or if he does them, he generates in himself a sense of shame and self-hatred. So what he's saying is almost everyone does this. Almost everyone does petty little thefts or break laws, goof off at work. They aren't perfect little robotic members of society, and yet they're told that they have to be. So when they do the things that everyone else is doing, they feel shame, and they got to hide that they are just like that. And then they become hypocrites to people like me, where you say one thing and you're doing another, and then I get pissed off and get myself in trouble. These over-socialized persons cannot even experience without guilt thoughts or feelings that are contrary to the accepted morality. He cannot think unclean thoughts. The over-socialized person is kept on a psychological leash and spends his life running on rails that society has laid down for him. Leftists of the over-socialized type tend to be intellectuals or members of the upper middle class. Notice that university intellectuals constitute the most highly socialized segment of society and also the most left-wing segments. So again, it's our schools, it's our universities that are becoming the teachers of how to become good little cogs in our wheel. They're the ones, and the irony is, their white, heterosexual, good-paying job, privileged status are the ones telling us how we should feel about the underprivileged status. The left takes on accepted moral principle, adopts it as its own, and then accuses mainstream society of violating those principles. Examples: racial equality, equality of the sexes, helping poor people, peace as opposed to war, nonviolence generally, freedom of expression, kindness to animals. More fundamentally, the duty of the individual to serve society and the duty of society to take care of an individual. All of these have been deeply rooted values of our society, or at least of its middle and upper classes, for a long time. These values are explicitly or implicitly expressed or presupposed in most of the material presented to us by the mainstream communication media and the educational system. Leftists, especially those of the over-socialized type, usually do not rebel against these principles, but justify their hostility to society by claiming with some degree of truth that society is not living up to these principles. So again, the short way of saying what he just said is all of us have a long time agreed about those things, that races are equal, the sexes should have equality, that we should help poor people, we should not be. That's something everyone understands, and yet they've risen to a level of making it some kind of champion thing that we're not holding up to these ideas, which, as he says, with some degree of truth, and then they make it this big, huge battle. But we all self-evident realize that those things are true. So we don't need to rail and fight against it because we all self-evidently understand those things to be true. Many leftists push for affirmative action for moving Black people into high prestige jobs, for improved education in Black schools and more money for such schools. The way of life of the Black underclass they regard as a social disgrace. They want to integrate the Black man into the system, make him a business executive, a lawyer, a scientist, just like the upper middle class white people. The leftists will reply that the last thing they want to do is make the Black man into a copy of the white man. Instead, they want to preserve African American culture. But in what does this preservation of American culture consist? It can hardly consist in anything more than eating Black style food, listening to Black style music, wearing Black style clothing, and going to Black style church and mosque. In other words, it can express itself only in superficial matters. So again, to make his point, the irony is that the people who are railing for affirmative action and keeping not keeping the Black man down are those who are trying to make the Black man into the white man. They're trying to make the Black man into high functioning members of society with good little paying jobs and all the ideals of the white businessman. That's what they want to make sure Blacks move towards, is become ideals like the white businessman. And the irony is that they'll make it sound like somehow that they're not trying to do that. That they're trying to, we're not trying to make Black people into white people. And yet what we're railing about is we want to make sure that they are getting the same jobs as white people, that they're regarded in the same way, that they're going to work and doing the same things as the white man, because that's what we want them to do. We want to force the Black man to become white man. And again, hear me carefully. I am not saying Black people are different. I am not saying Black people shouldn't have jobs as CEOs and all those things. This is Ted Kaczynski's argument that the people railing for for making a huge stink out of affirmative action are in essence trying to make Black people be pushed into becoming good little white people. That's what they're trying to do, while simultaneously telling you that's not what their goal is to do. And then they try to appropriate Black culture. Again, I'm interpreting a lot here for you, right? They appropriate Black culture. So somehow I'm going to now listen to rap music and say that's supporting the Black man. I'm going to eat Black foods, whatever the hell that means. I'm going to do Black things. I'm going to adopt their culture. I'm going to show how Black I am as a white person to integrate them into society. And those are all superficial. That doesn't really change anything. You're just appropriating their culture. Wow. What a I'm nervous giving this thing because I feel like people are going to just check out because we have become groupthink. So people are just going to check out because all they're going to hear is the political stuff. In all essential respects, most leftists of the over-socialized type want to make the Black man conform to white middle-class ideals. They want to make him study technical subjects, become an executive or scientist, spend his life climbing the social ladder to prove that Black people are as good as white. They want to make Black fathers responsible. They want to make Black gangs to become nonviolent, but these are exactly the values of the industrial technological society or system. The system couldn't care less what type of music a man listens to, what type of clothes he wears, or what religion he believes in, as long as he studies in school, holds a respectable job, climbs the social status ladder as a responsible parent, is nonviolent, and so forth. In effect, however much they may deny it, the over-socialized left want to integrate the Black man into the system and make him adopt its values. Now, again, this is not to say for those groupthink people, again, that Black people are bad fathers and irresponsible, and that Black people are in gangs and violent and whatever, and that we're trying to fight against their natural tendency. That would be a freaking racist sounding shit to say, that Blacks inherently are violent and want to be gang members and are horrible parents, and therefore trying to make them not horrible parents that's some racist shit. But that's not what he's saying. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is the attempts to go into the ghettos and bring them up and make them like white people and to do all these things is the attempt to socialize and make Black people into white people and make them functioning members of the cog system. And again, there are poor white people. There are horrendous fathers in the white community. It's not about Black and white. But that's what people are going to focus on. If you're a groupthink, you're going to hear the part about Black people, Black fathers being bad fathers, and go, "Oh, you racist son of a bitch." That's not even what it's about. The problems of the leftists are indicative of the problems of our society as a whole. Low self-esteem, depressive tendencies, and defeatism are not restricted to the left, though they are especially notable in the left. They are widespread in our society. We are even told by experts how to eat, how to exercise, how to make love, how to raise our kids, and so forth. All right, so that's it. And I feel like because of our society, I have this problem, right? How many people are going to stop watching The Devil's Advocates because they couldn't handle something that I said while reading somebody else's comment? And yes, I provided my own interpretation of it. So therefore, if you're woke, too woke, or if you're too over socialized, as Ted Kaczynski would say, then me putting any type of defense or spin or try to explain it to you in certain terms makes me part of the problem. And so there's a number of people out there who will unsubscribe perhaps right now because I'm part of the problem. Because I am not groupthink. The irony is beyond me. And again, I'm trying to explain to you two things in our book series. What did Ted Kaczynski feel? And I'm trying to interpret that for him. That's all I'm doing. I'm not giving you my feelings on the matter. I'm trying to interpret Ted Kaczynski's feelings. And how does that relate to Luigi Mangione? How much of Luigi Mangione agreed with Ted Kaczynski? Was Luigi Mangione, who was a white, good student from upper class or upper middle class, wealth, okay? Was Luigi Mangione against the very system that he was part of? He was part of that wealth, status, equality. He was in the college system. Did Luigi Mangione participate in any of the liberal, leftist, woke movement stuff, or did he find that all silly and ridiculous? And again, look to books like Ted Kaczynski as saying, why does everybody groupthink? As a little caveat to that, we were told that Luigi Mangione, for example, when all of his friends, when they were younger, were asked to draw a picture of their ideal home, all of his friends drew big mansions that represented wealth and affluence. Luigi Mangione drew a simple, small house, and he didn't understand why everybody's so focused on wealth and status. So while Luigi Mangione had wealth and status, the question is, did he feel like he was part of that wealth and status system? So there you have it. Foods for thought. Again, what are we doing this book series for? To inform the story behind the story. If you want to understand Luigi Mangione as a man, keep in mind that Luigi Mangione on Goodreads, right? He highly praised this book as something we should read. There are thoughts and concepts in this book that Luigi Mangione must agree with, or he wouldn't have told us that this was a good book. Gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Liked the message. The only part we know for sure he didn't like was that Ted Kaczynski hurt innocent people. So there you go. Take it for what it is. Hope you'll stay with the series. Hope you'll move along and let me riff on it as we go and not hang me as being a not little good productive member of society.